Okay, good morning. Thank you for coming. I am a walker and talker, so forgive me if I pace back and forth a little when I speak to you. And thank you for that very nice introduction, and Tanya, thank you for reaching out to me. I actually have known Tanya for many, many years. She came to 10th Street when I was early in my practice and visited with us and kind of got to know what it was like to be a pediatrician a few birthdays ago, I think. So I'm going to start by telling you guys a story about a party that I hosted at my house not long ago. And this was a party where it was a school-based function, and my daughter and my son each invited about a half a dozen kids over to our house. And when one mom came for pickup, she said to me, "Do you mind while I have you if I ask you a question?" And for the pediatricians in the audience, we know this phenomenon really well because at drop-off and pickup, you'll make small talk with parents, and then inevitably they'll say, "Well, I've got you. Can I ask you a question?" I actually really like it. I don't mind at all. I'm flattered that they'll ask. And so I said to the mom, "Sure, go ahead." And she said, "Is it normal for my son to have body odor?" So we're standing in my den, and we're watching the kids kind of run around and play, and the party's winding down. And I look at the group of girls, and they're not the young, straight, flat little girls they used to be. They're just a little curvy. They've got beginner hips or little breast buds, or a couple of them have pimples here and there. And then I look at the boys, and the boys are about 2 years younger than the girls, and they're running around being a little crazy, like boys will be. And as I'm watching them, a couple of them kick their shoes off. And it takes a few seconds, but this smell comes across, and it's not horrible. It's not neutral, though. And I look at the mom, and I said, "Yeah, it's totally normal. This is the beginning of puberty." And this mother looks at me, and her jaw drops. I mean, literally, I think I'm going to have to pick it up off the floor. She says, "Since when is this normal? The girls are 10, and the boys are 8. And she's right. The world has changed. Normal has changed because growing up isn't what it used to be. Everything in the world has really changed. I mean, if you think about it, when we were growing up, a phone either came in a booth or was plugged into a jack. Or a neighborhood was a place that you rode your bike racing to get home in time for dinner. I think about cable television. When I was young and we got cable television, it required a cable and it required a television. Calories, clothing sizes, video games, they've all changed. But the biggest difference for our kids is that they are growing up younger, earlier than they used to, than we did. They are changing physically sooner than we did. Not emotionally, not mentally, but physically. And this is a really significant difference. When I look at kids and what's happening to their bodies, when I talk to them, particularly when I talk to girls, because I write in the girl space, so I tend to speak with more girls, and I ask them what they think of this, they don't like it. They don't want, these 10-year-old girls do not want to be physically changing so soon. Now, they do want to grow up, don't get me wrong. They want the coveted things that you have to wait until you're older to get, right? So my daughter asked me for the following 4 things on an endless loop. She would like to be able to watch PG-13 movies. She would like lip gloss. She would like an iPod Touch. And she would like wedge sneakers. I don't get the wedge sneakers. I say no to all of them. And I say no because I know that she's not ready for it. That these kids may look a little older than we did at their age, but they are no more emotionally mature. So I say no. And she looks at me, and she's confused because she sees a slightly more sophisticated group of kids sort of physically around her. It's as if she was looking at me saying, come on. I mean, the average third grader has body odor and breast buds. Why am I not getting these things? You know? So growing up is nothing like it used to be. I am going to get into the whys and hows. But before I do, I'll walk you through a little bit of my own personal history because it'll help you to understand the lens through which I see this topic, and it will help you to understand the advice that I'm going to give you. So I was born in LA, and I was raised not far from here, just on the other side of the hill. I didn't know a lot about what I was going to do when I grew up. Only one thing I was absolutely certain about, which was I was never going to live in LA as an adult. I ended up going to medical school, not because there were any doctors in my family. In fact, I had no modeling for that at all. I just liked math and science. I was a pretty academic kid, loved school, and I ended up on a path that took me out of LA for college and led me down a road where I ended up at medical school. And it was a great gift for me, but it was almost an accidental path. I ended up coming back to the West Coast for my residency training. For those of you who are not physicians or who don't understand how it works in medicine, you go to medical school, you graduate, you get your MD, which means people call you doctor, but you don't know anything about the field in which you want to specialize until after medical school. That's when you go into your internship and residency training. That's where you really learn how to take care of patients. And so that's what I did at UCSF. And you know, the most common question that I will get as a pediatrician is, well, why? Why pediatrics? What made you choose this field? And my answer is very simple. Pediatric patients are the nicest patients. You know, they're the best. They want to get well. There is no workman's comp in pediatrics, right? And so because they are the only patients who, as a rule, do not want to be patients, it was the most fun to take care of them. And that's why I became a pediatrician. I eventually moved back to LA, long story, and ended up at 10th Street Pediatrics in Santa Monica. And for the next several years, I would describe what I had as work nirvana. It was awesome. I was in a big group practice where my partners were my mentors and my friends, where I had patients that I absolutely adored, loved the families, loved taking care of the kids. I started writing when I was at 10th Street. I wrote, you know, as a pediatrician, you get the same questions over and over and over on somewhat of an endless loop. And at a certain point, I decided, well, you know, Dr. Spock's book was a little old, and someone should write a new book and give parents advice. And okay, I'll just write down my answers and see where it goes. And I published a couple books. It turns out I was the world's worst saleswoman ever because I wrote these books, but I didn't tell anyone about them. And I didn't tell anyone about them because I was never going to go to a doctor who tried to sell me anything, right? So what am I going to say? Like, oh, your child has colic? That's so interesting. You should read my book. It's in chapter 3. No. So I didn't tell anyone. I kind of had this secret writing life on the side, but it worked for me. It was a great balance, and life was fun. Work was very fulfilling, and I loved it. And then I had children. So everyone tells pediatricians, wait until you have children. It will profoundly change the way you practice pediatrics. And I had no doubt they were right. If you have kids living under your roof, you think about pediatric medicine very differently than if you don't. But I never imagined that having children would change me so profoundly that I would actually leave the practice of medicine. The only way I can describe what happened is that it became too ironic. I was taking care of everyone else's kids, and I was never taking care of my own. And that was my own struggle. There are a lot of pediatricians who are able to balance it. I just couldn't find a way to do that. So there was this one day where a mom came in with a child who was about the age of my younger son at the time, maybe about 18, 19 months. And her child had 104 fever, and she was freaked out. Pediatricians don't get very freaked out about 104 fevers. Parents do, both are rational. So this mom comes in and she panicked. And I examine her child, and I explain what's going on, and we talk about how to manage the fever and this, that, and the other. And she stops the visit, and she says to me, "You are so lucky." And I said, "Why am I lucky?" And she said, "Because when your child is sick, you know what to do." And at that moment, I burst into tears in the middle of the exam room, and I said, "My child does have 104 right now, and I'm taking care of your kid, and I'm not home with mine." And I knew it was time to go. And so I left. I left the practice of medicine, and I decided I was going to trade full-time practice for full-time writing. And instead of having a message go one-to-one in an exam room, I was going to write and send a message 1 to 100, or if I was lucky, 1 to 1,000 through blog posts and articles and books. I never in my life imagined the message would go 1 to 1,000,000. That was crazy. But the way that happened was through a series of colossally lucky steps that landed me in Middleton, Wisconsin, which is the home of American Girl, where I was sitting around a table with the publishing division of the company and the president of American Girl. And I basically went and pitched them and said, "You have this book called The Care and Keeping of You, and I think it's time that it gets a little bit of an update." Care and Keeping of You came out in 1998. It was during my pediatric residency training. Within a year, it became the best-selling body book in the country. And the reason why is that it covered a very narrow section of development. It covered what your body is going to do and how you should take care of it. And it was the first book that didn't feel the need to cover sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And it didn't feel the need to talk over kids' heads. It was cartoony and simple and straightforward, and it taught girls how to care for their bodies. And it was an incredible book. And I said to them, it was now, by the time I'm sitting in Middleton, about 12 or 13 years after it had been published, and I said, "The world has changed. Growing up isn't what it used to be." And I said, "Kids are entering puberty sooner, about 1 to 2 years sooner than we did. And your target demographic, your 8 to 10-year-old girls who march through your stores and buy this book, they're not starting puberty, they're in puberty. And so we need to do something to this book to age it down. We need to give younger girls, right as they're beginning to enter the process, we need to give those girls the information. They need more, not too much, but more. And then let's give the older girls something separate, a follow-up book that is their book, but let's not take it away from the young kids." Now, either I was really, really convincing, or much more likely, they just went to their stores and took a look, right? And they looked at all these kids who were walking through, and they said, Natterson's got a point. They're all physically changing. They're all whining and complaining. They're all in puberty, and they let me do it. And so that began my relationship with American Girl and the Care and Keeping of You books. So that's a little bit about me and my history. And I stand here today wearing my pediatric hat, wearing my author hat, wearing my expert hat, although I always put expert in air quotes because my children are experts in certain things too, and that word gets bandied about, and it's, I think, a little overused. But I'm here to tell you why puberty is happening earlier for our kids and what you can do about it, how you can handle it as parents. When it comes to giving you advice about how to parent through it, I have to step off of whatever platform I'm on and acknowledge that I am in it with you, okay? My kids are the same ages as yours. And even though I see the general data, even though I understand the bigger picture, I can't tell you exactly what to do. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself. Okay? One skill that I have, maybe because of my education, more likely because I was just born the second most risk-averse person ever on the face of the earth. I'm married to the first most risk-averse person ever. I see bad things. Remember that movie, I See Dead People? I see bad things. I see when things are going to go wrong. And in medicine, it served me very well. I can understand when a cough is going to go into pneumonia. I understood when diagnosing a kid with a mild concussion and keeping them off a field meant saving them from a bigger traumatic brain injury if you put them back out on a field, okay? I see when putting your fourth grader on Instagram and ignoring that you have to be 13 rule. I see when that leads to bullying, or maybe even worse, turning your kid into the bully. So I see bad things. And I can lay those out for you, and I will, but ultimately, you're going to have to decide what works for you in terms of parenting your child through this earlier puberty. And I am too, because I'm swimming in the same waters with you. So with that said, let's go back to the stinky 8-year-olds and the slightly busty 10-year-olds and the mother who's got her jaw on the floor in my house asking why is this the new normal? Why are our kids going through puberty earlier than they ever did before? I've studied this for a long time, and I've come up with my own system of answering it. I like to say that I can take science and simplify it. I might oversimplify it here, so forgive me if you're a scientist. There are 2 buckets for this answer. The first sort of series of answers is in the victim bucket, okay? The woe is us, this happened to us, and our kids are victims of the world we live in. And the second series of answers is going to fall into this bucket. It's our own fault. Okay? So first, the victim bucket. We are victims of our environment. Everything about our world has changed since we were growing up. And I'm not trying to be flip with my word choice. It's really, really different. Okay? People ask me all the time, is obesity causing the earlier start of puberty? Is it BPA and plastic? Is it what happens on farms with pesticides and hormones and antibiotics? Yes, 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 yes. The answer to why our kids are developing earlier is not going to be one thing or 2 things. It is going to be a gigantic heap of things, all intertwined and very difficult to separate. Okay, we call that multifactorial in medicine. It just means tons of reasons. And because there are so many reasons and because they're so intertwined, even if we figure it out, which we will eventually, unentangling them, disentangling them, is going to be very, very, very difficult. Okay, so the solution is not going to rest with our kids. It's going to hopefully be apparent in their kids' generation. How do we know it's so many variables? Well, first of all, there are a lot of smart people studying it, and they're looking at every corner of this, and they are finding associations and causations all over the place. Let me give you a few examples, just a few, okay, because I could go on for 3 hours with examples. When you talk about chemicals, people always want to talk about what's the impact of chemicals in our environment on our bodies. The sheer number of chemicals that we are exposed to today compared to the sheer number that we were exposed to when we were growing up is staggering. So if you're a chemical manufacturer and you make a brand new chemical, you register it with the government, okay? And there's a list, a registry, and it's available online, and it's for public consumption. And that list currently contains well over 80,000 chemicals, distinct chemicals. Every single year, 2,000 new ones are added to the list. So that means that from the time I graduated high school until now, we're north of 50,000 new chemicals in our world compared to when we were growing up. It's a lot. Now, numbers don't tell a story, okay? So it doesn't mean that these chemicals are causing, but 50,000, that's a large load, and it just keeps on coming. And it's going to be very interesting to figure out which of those chemicals are causing problems and which aren't. The vast majority, by the way, are probably not. It gets really hard to figure out how to control what you're putting into and onto your body based upon the way that manufacturers are told they have to disclose ingredients or contents. Let me use the cosmetics industry as an example. So you go to buy shampoo or conditioner, and you flip it around, and there's that long list of ingredients on the back with lots of multisyllabic words, and they have like 50 vowels in every word. And you're trying to figure out, what are these chemicals and are these bad for me? Or if you're buying the shampoo for your kids, you're thinking about it even more, because we tend to make decisions for our children a little bit more cautiously than for ourselves. Well, the listed ingredients that you see is only really a partial list, because if the creator of your conditioner is able to argue that its scent and its ability to seal your cuticles so you don't have split ends are special and make it a unique product, then they're allowed to call that their trade secret, and any ingredient that they use that adds to that quality does not have to be listed on the ingredient list. Okay, those are trade secrets. So if the trade secret ingredients were also required to be on a label, instead of being this long, it would probably be about this long. And that's just the cosmetics industry. We see this happen over and over and over again across multiple industries. So there is a mechanism where transparency is not available. So even if you're trying to limit what's going into your body, it's really, really hard to do that, given the world we live in. It's also really, really hard to do it because the world we live in includes very simple things like air that we breathe, and so many aerosolized chemicals are causing so many problems for us, okay? Anyone who grew up here in LA remembers smog, right? So you fly into LAX, and there was this huge, soupy, yellow, disgusting mess that would hang over LA, and as you would fly in, you would literally descend through it. If you ever watched the local news, on the weather forecast, there was the temperature, there was whether it was going to be partly cloudy or partly sunny, and then there was the smog alert level. And if the number was high enough on the smog alert level, you were not allowed to have recess or PE outside, okay? And anyone who grew up here remembers those bad smog alert days, because if you took a really deep breath in, it burned. And now, that doesn't happen, right? I don't remember the last time it burned when I breathed in. Our air must be better. It's not, okay? How do I know? Because the rate of asthma continues to go up and up and up every single year. And it is not that we are getting better at diagnosing asthma. Asthma is not a difficult one to diagnose, okay? It's that more people are getting asthma because what they're breathing is tipping them into the disease. We have 29 million adults and 10 million children who are currently asthmatic. That's 1 out of every 12 Americans. If you look at when I was in 5th grade in 1980, 3.5% of all kids had asthma. Today, my daughter's in 4th grade, that number is 3 times. 10% of all children have asthma. So even if our air looks better, it is not necessarily any better. And it is probably one of the drivers of this whole issue. We have to think about medicines. You know, I'm a doctor. I have respect for medicines. I don't fear medicines. But boy, as a society, are we willing to put medication into our body? It's pretty impressive. And we have to think about how this has driven changes in the way our kids' bodies are developing. Now, this is true across the board. So I'm going to give you the example of antidepressants, but I am not saying that taking an antidepressant causes early puberty. What I'm suggesting is think about how the life of antidepressants has changed, apply it to every other group of medicines, and you will start to wonder, how much is this driving our process? Antidepressants were first discovered in the 1950s. They were popularized in the 1980s. In 1987, Prozac Nation came out. That was a huge deal, and it really caused antidepressant use to skyrocket. Today, 1 out of every 10 Americans is on an antidepressant. It's pretty impressive. Again, numbers don't tell a story, but it's not just antidepressants, it's antacids, it's antibiotic, it's anti-anything. We take them. We take these medicines, and I wonder what the effect is, not just of the medication, but also of what we call the vehicle, right? Everything else that's in a pill or a syrup that's going into our body. Even illicit drugs are different. So the active ingredient in marijuana is called THC. When I was in high school, the average concentration of THC was 4%. Today, it's 10%, and medical marijuana is 20%. Okay? Everything in the world is different. So I call it the victim category because it's very fair to kind of sit here and listen to all these examples come at you and go, I mean, what are we supposed to do about it? Our world has changed. It's very overwhelming, and we and our children are victims of this environmental shift. It's true, and that's a fair way of looking at it, but I would argue that it's not the best way of looking at it. That at a certain point, we all have to do something and take a little responsibility and make a change, because it's impacting our children, and it will impact our children's children. And I think about it a lot like I think about global warming, where the first phase is going, really, this is happening, and feeling overwhelmed, and then the next stage is, we gotta do something about it. And so I encourage you, as you start to look around the world and try to wrap your brain around the things that may be contributing to this phenomenon, think also about what you can do about it. The second group of answers to why are our kids going through puberty earlier is it's our own darn fault group of answers. That's lifestyle, okay? Exercise, sleep, eating. And this is a huge driver, because we know that over the past couple of decades, as the average weight of most Americans has increased, as we have entered an obesity epidemic, we know that increased weight tends to correlate with earlier puberty, okay? And I won't get into the science behind it, but fat cells produce more hormone, tip our bodies into puberty earlier, our kids' bodies into puberty earlier. So let's go through lifestyle, because lifestyle is something that you can really make quick little changes and make a big difference in your life and your kids' life. So there's exercise. Exercise is the easy one. We don't get enough. 40% of US adults are considered sedentary. When I was growing up, I will never forget, we learned the word sedentary when I was in 6th grade, and the example of sedentary was the librarian. And it was, it's burned in my brain. 4 out of 10 adults meet that criteria. They don't move enough. But that's not the shocking number. The shocking number is when you look at kids. 75% of kids do not exercise for an hour a day or more. 3 out of 4 children are not moving for an hour a day. Okay, that's incredible, and that includes PE at school. Okay, so our exercise baseline has fallen so low and has become such a problem, and it is going to have such profound health and wellness effects down the road that we all have to do something to fix it. We eat too much. Everyone knows this. Portion size has increased, right? Bagels that used to fit in the palm of my hand are now the size of my head. 8-ounce sodas are now 20-ounce Gatorades. I don't care that it's Gatorade, not soda. They're the same thing, as far as I'm concerned, and throw vitamin water in there while you're at it. Okay? So we eat bigger amounts at every sitting, and we eat more throughout the day. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that your plate size has increased. Your fork size, your spoon size. Every bite you take is bigger than it was a generation ago, which is incredible to me. If you have the ability to go find your grandmother's silver or someone's old cutlery, find it and go look at the size of a teaspoon. You will be stunned at the difference between your spoon sizes and the old utensil sizes. It's really, really shocking. It's a profound difference. I went and I got new spoons recently, and the cereal spoons are so big you cannot fit them in your mouth. They're like this. Every bite, we're eating more calories. And it's not just how much we're eating, it's what we're eating, okay? Our sugars are profoundly different. Our sugars are highly processed sugars now. High fructose corn syrup, and even sucrose, it's highly processed. And what we know about this is that this highly processed material is metabolized by our body differently. Okay? Our bodies don't like it. They treat it like a toxin. There's a talk on YouTube. If you have an hour and 30 minutes, you can break it up. There's a guy who gives a talk. He's the head of endocrinology at UCSF. He gives a talk called Sugar, the Bitter Truth. It is amazing. It's the hard science of why our bodies can't metabolize processed sugar. And it's incredible. And at the end of the day, if you just eat whole foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, and you get away from processed, you're going to save yourself and your children a lot of illness down the road. So it's exercise, it's what we're eating, and sleep. Sleep is a huge driver of obesity, okay? People don't think about sleep. I think there are moments where it's popularized and I read about it in the press and I'm excited that people are talking about it. But I don't think people really understand the profundity of the importance of sleep. So we used to say in medicine that we knew people who slept less were more likely to be overweight. And we thought that it was because if you sleep fewer hours, you're awake for more hours and you're eating when you're awake, which sounded logical and is so wrong. It's not the right answer for why sleep is associated with increased weight. Sleep is associated with increased weight because when you sleep, there are two hormones that are associated with sleep, leptin and ghrelin. And when you're awake, they shift in one direction, and when you're asleep, they shift in another direction. And when you get a threshold number of hours, 8 for adult, 10 for kids, okay, your leptin gets high enough and your ghrelin gets low enough that your body is told, hey, burn through calories. Don't worry about it. You don't have to look for food. You don't have to be hungry. You're fine. But if leptin doesn't get high enough and ghrelin doesn't get low enough, well, then you wake up and your body is still in starvation mode. Your brain is saying, you're hungry, find food, forage. Your fat cells are saying, store more calories as fat because you need this, because you're hungry. It's a game that your brain and a bunch of hormones are playing. And it's very, very profound because it's changing the way we burn through calories. Okay? So if you want to work on your waistline, the first thing you should be doing is getting more sleep and getting your kids into bed earlier. Screens affect every one of these lifestyle parameters. When we or our kids are in front of screens, we don't move, we do eat, and we don't sleep. And the sleep and screens connection is very interesting and very underplayed. It's not just that we're on screens and staying up later and multitasking and not getting through things as effectively, but the blue light from screens stimulates your brain, makes your brain go into hyperdrive. And so even though your child may be staring at a screen like this, their brain is upregulated, not downregulated. And what that means is that if they are on a screen, whether it's to do homework or to be social, and then they turn that screen off, turn their lights off, and try to go to bed, they can't. It's very hard for them. So I encourage you to think about how screens are affecting your child's sleep habits and your own. As an aside, because I'm a pediatrician, I got to say about screens, screen safety is a huge issue. When I was in practice, I left 6 years ago. When I was in practice, I used to say to parents, put the computer in the kitchen or the den or somewhere where there's traffic and you're walking back and forth and your kid can know that you can see what's on the screen. And that's one more way of just having a little check system where you're making sure your child's not going to be somewhere online that they shouldn't be. That is completely unrealistic today because we've moved to entirely mobile devices. My son can be sitting next to me on an iPad. Next to me, I can't see what's on the screen, right? So that piece of screens doesn't change how the body is developing. But what it does change is how kids perceive what they should be doing with their bodies. And the reason I say it this way is that if you look at 5th grade boys, 50% of them have seen porn online. Now, I don't think it's because they're bad kids. I actually think it comes from a very innocent place. I think boys get quiet, they don't have any resources, they don't have a lot of outlets to talk about what's happening to their bodies, and they start looking things up. It's not a bad thing. It's coming from a decent place, but it's 2 clicks and they're on a hardcore porn site and they don't mean to be. And when they see those images, now they think they know what they're supposed to do with their body in the long run. And that's fairly profound. So you've got 2 lists of why our kids are tipping into puberty earlier. You've got the victim list and you've got the it's our own fault list, the things around us and then our lifestyle choices. Both are going to be true, okay? And I encourage you, as you start to answer the question for yourself and you're looking at your kids and you're trying to figure it all out, I encourage you to make changes in both categories if you can to help your kids, okay? But here's a twist about puberty, and you got to go with me on this one because it takes a little mental math for a second, that will surprise you. Puberty is starting earlier, but it's not accelerating. How do we know this? Well, the average age for a girl to get her period is 12 and a half, okay? when we were growing up, in fact, for the past 50 or 60 years, the average age has been around 12 and 3/4. So you can call it ballpark the same age, or you could say, if you want to be really nitpicky, it's moved backwards by 3 months, okay? And periods, by the way, are not the beginning of puberty. They are a middle stage, but it's a really nice, easy marker because a girl can answer definitively yes or no, have I gotten my period? I have told you that girls and boys are entering puberty 1 to 2 years earlier than they used to. The average age for a girl to start her puberty is 8. The average age for a boy is 9, okay? And this is an average. In certain ethnic groups, kids start a lot younger. So if an 8-year-old girl is starting puberty, even if she was going at the same pace that we went at, she should be getting her period 1 to 2 years earlier. She shouldn't be getting it at 12 and a half. She should be getting it at 11. And if puberty was accelerating and going faster, that girl should be getting her period at 10. But she's not. The average age for first period is 12 and a half. So what it tells us is that our kids are entering puberty earlier, and they're going through it more slowly, in slow-mo, which is a special kind of hell for them and for us. Okay? And I think that's a huge piece of this, a huge piece of this. The best piece of advice I'm going to give you is that when you parent through this very slow, exaggerated puberty, you have to recognize that while your child's body is changing sooner than yours did, and while kids are occupying the bodies that we occupied when we were tweens or young teens, okay, their brains are no more mature than ours were at their age. Body and brain development are totally independent. Let me give you 60 seconds on brain development so you can understand how distinct the two things are. When a baby is born, they're born with all the nerves, all the neurons they're ever going to have inside their brain. In fact, they're born with a lot more than they're ever going to have, and a bunch of those neurons will die off over several years. The neurons that they're born with are largely naked wires. They're just raw nerves. Eventually, they'll be insulated with a material called myelin. Myelin works in the brain just like the plastic that covers the cord you plug in your computer with works in your house. When you insulate a wire, a message can go faster. A naked wire, messages travel slowly and inefficiently, and any wires that are next door get stimulated as well. So now you can understand why a newborn baby startles all the time and can't do anything in a coordinated way and doesn't really have any processes other than breathing and eating and moving down pat. It's because the brain is not myelinated. Myelination, insulation of the brain, starts down low, the very base of the brain in the back, and it makes its way up and out over many, many years. So the first place to get myelin is the base of the brain, where basically everything that you do to stay alive is governed, breathing, eating, moving. Then as myelin moves up and out, it hits the sensory centers, the language centers, the motor centers. There you got your toddlers and your preschoolers. Okay. Keeps moving up and out a little further, and around the tween years gets to this area called the limbic system. The limbic system is the emotional center of the brain. It's located kind of between your ears, but deep inside. The limbic system is responsible for motivations, behaviors, memories, which is so interesting to me because we all struggle to remember things from before we were 8 or 9. That's because that area wasn't myelinated. But as soon as you hit 2nd grade, 3rd grade, you have a lot of memories on board because of the maturation of that part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that also responds to peer pressure. When a friend tells you to do something, it lights up and fires and fires and fires. When a parent tells you to do something, not so much. Okay? The very last part of the brain to mature, to myelinate, is the frontal lobe. It's at the top, outermost. And the last part of the frontal lobe to mature is the prefrontal cortex, right under the forehead. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that goes, if I drink and drive, I could be putting myself in danger, and I could be putting other drivers in danger and other passengers in danger, but I'm really thinking about drinking, and I'm not sure how I'm going to get home. Let me weigh those two things. I think I'm not going to drink and drive. That's the prefrontal cortex. It weighs pros and cons, and it helps you make a good, sound decision that has future consequences. Well, for the past 20 years or so, scientists have been looking at brain maturation and myelination, trying to figure out the time course over which this happens. We were growing up, everyone said that the brain was fully mature by the time you graduated from high school. There are MRI studies called functional MRI studies, fMRI studies, that look at actual brain metabolism, what's happening, where the brain is doing its work. And the most recent data shows that your prefrontal cortex, it's not mature when your kid graduates from high school. It's not mature when they graduate from college. Every time these same kids are scanned every single year, the researchers, one of whom is down at UCLA, and he's an incredible speaker, Jay Geed, if you've ever heard him, every time he says, I have to extend the study another year, it's not done yet. They're now saying between 25 and 30 is when your prefrontal cortex comes in. So why does it matter? It matters because your tween, who is going through puberty, and your teenager, who is there and coming out the back end, they have no maturation in their prefrontal cortex. They have no ability to make smart long-term decisions. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't make good decisions. A lot of them do. And it doesn't mean that your parenting doesn't matter, because of course it does. But if you put them into a peer-driven situation, the choices that they make happen in their limbic system, in the emotional center of their brain. That's what takes over because it's mature. Okay? So what do you do with that information, given this whole talk about puberty happening earlier? And my advice to you is that as parents, you just recognize that their body is developing a lot faster than their brain. The brain is not on a nice, slow, steady course, slower than we ever thought. And the body, while it's not going faster in its development, it's starting earlier and it's more protracted. And I encourage you to honor that distinction, because sometimes we look at kids who look older and we think they're ready for more responsibility, and they're not. And when it comes to social media, which has become a huge issue for me personally, because I watch what happens to children on social media, it makes me very, very sad. When it comes to social media, I feel like parents, they're afraid to look at their kids who look a little bit older and hold them back. But then if you understand that it's their limbic system that's taking over, and that risk-taking and bikini selfies and bullying all happen online, right, on social media sites, and that frontal lobe is not available to them when their friends are sitting around encouraging them to post certain things, you may parent through it differently. Okay? As I said in the beginning, I'm in it with you. I don't have all the answers. I don't have the right answers for you as parents. I live in fear of not just teenage drama and bad friend choices, but I live in fear of my kids doing something that's so colossally stupid they will end up in an ER. I live in fear of bikini selfies. I don't know how to unglamorize them, or full body tattoos, or any of the stuff that we see floating around online in front of our kids. And so my best advice to you is that because growing up isn't what it used to be, we do 3 things as parents. The first is that we get comfortable saying no. No, there is no one thing that your kid doesn't get to do that everyone else does, right? And how many times do we hear over and over and over again, everyone has it, everyone gets to do it. It just doesn't, it's not true. So we can say no. The second thing, and this is the most valuable piece of advice I'm going to give you, is if you said yes and you regret it, do a take back, a do-over. You say to your kid, I messed up. I gave you this thing, or I told you you could do this thing. I don't think I realized what I was doing. And it's not fair to you for me to be putting you out there, so I'm going to take it back. And we're going to wait, and when you're a little older, we'll try it again. And parents feel paralyzed. They say to me that they don't feel that they have the ability to do that. That once they say, okay, you can go on social media, or okay, you can ride your bike to so-and-so's house alone, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. Once they said yes, they feel like they can't say no. But that's not true. And in fact, your child is looking for the limits, and they will feel loved when you say, I messed up. And the third thing, the third piece of advice is don't be a victim. because we've got all these reasons why our kids are going through puberty early, where we could sit back and feel as if they're happening to us. And if we feel that way and behave that way, and we model that behavior for our children, then our children will learn to victimize themselves. And our children have a lot of work to do to change the world for their own children. So I encourage you, instead of seeing yourself as a victim, once you feel like you've gotten your head wrapped around it a little, pick one thing, try to be proactive, even if it's something as simple as taking care of the health and wellness in your own home. Teach your children to be proactive, because their world is going to need a lot of changing, so that this talk is not about puberty starting in 5- and 6-year-olds in another generation. I am happy to answer any questions you have. I hope it's helpful information. Yes? I've got a couple pediatricians right here in the audience. I'm going to punt that to them, only because I'm on the other side of the hill, and I'm a big believer that there is really no reason to sit in 3 hours of traffic in order to get somewhere for your child's health care. So I would definitely, yeah. Yes?
How long does it take the stimulation of the brain to be undone from this blue light?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I don't think there's any documentation that looks at that quite yet. There are a lot of fMRI studies that are going on to see what the impact of screen use is on brain activity. The advice right now from the folks who are doing the research is that you should have at least an hour between turning off a screen and going to bed. The reason I'm clear about blue light is that paperwhite screens like Kindle, the Kindle readers, do not have the same neurostimulatory effects. I can almost promise you that you will start seeing a generation of iPads and of computer screens that will have paperwhite, kind of non-blue light backlit screens because of this phenomenon. The reality is that kids have to be on screens, and it's extremely hard for them to have an hour of screen-free time right before bed, because the organization of their day, they have their after-school stuff, and they finally get home, they have dinner, then they go on a screen. It's advice that is almost impossible to follow. So what I do in my house, my kids are young enough, is your screen time, your homework on screens is first, and then you do any other reading or paperwork after. But I'm hitting the end of that. You know, we're just finishing 4th grade, and I can already see I'm hitting the end of that practical solution. So I would start looking around, and as you see new generations of screens that come out that don't have blue light, that is going to be a worthy investment for kids, I think. Yeah. Okay. Let me just say, the question is, when do you get concerned that your child is not entering puberty? And I should just say as a side note, the answers for girls and the answers for boys are going to be different. Boys, no one looks at the boys. I feel so sad for our boys. There were like 10 years of New York Times articles, headliners, girls going into puberty earlier, blah, blah, you know, all this stuff, girls, girls, girls. Finally, someone looked at the boys. Finally. Oh, the boys are going through puberty too. You know, these poor boys just get missed. And I get it. The girl changes are more obvious. The boy changes are much more subtle. For those of you who have boys, the first signs of puberty, foot odor. So they kick their shoes off and you go, oh, they're in early puberty. Some boys are sweaty from birth. So there are going to be some kids who always have like a little armpit stink, but it's really the shoe smell that clears a room. That's your first sign. And then moodiness in boys is different than moodiness in girls. Moodiness in boys, typically, they retreat into themselves. It's as if you gave them a zip-up hoodie that went all the way up, and they would zip it all the way up and just close in. That's a boy who's entering puberty. Or the other extreme, which is aggression. They get very aggressive and almost surprise themselves with their aggression, and many boys vacillate between the two because testosterone is a drug. So those are the earliest signs. The reason boys were missed is that the earliest physiological sign of puberty is growth of the testicles, and we all know that our boys will not let us take a look at them naked after a certain age. So it's not like mothers were going, oh, and my son's testicles are growing. So there was no data, right? So people finally started measuring them. I'd like to meet those boys from that study. And we started realizing that boys were entering puberty. Girls enter puberty, similar early signs. It's body odor, it's moodiness, and it's breast budding. And there's a lot of research on the distinction between breast development and pubic hair development, and which one is the marker for periods coming earlier versus just slower, earlier, delayed puberty. What I have seen anecdotally is that our girls are developing breasts much sooner, but they're not developing hair much sooner. Those are different hormone axes, but I don't know what that's going to lead us to. Okay, now your question: when is it too late? As a parent, I can say it's never too late. But as a doctor, there is such a thing as too late. And we know that if girls haven't gotten their period by the time they're 16, they're considered outside the window of normal. 8 to 16 is normal. Okay, it's a huge range. And there are a lot of variables that impact that, including the age that your mom was when she got her period, and ethnic group. We know that African American and Hispanic kids get their period an average of 1 to 2 years younger than Caucasian kids. But entering puberty, we like to see some secondary sex characteristics by the time a kid is about 12. Now, I have seen it on both sides. More often than not, parents are worried about kids that are coming in too early. If a 6-year-old starts having significant body changes associated with puberty, we'll probably send them to a neurologist. At 7, we will not. 7, it is normal to have breast development and hair. So it's not the clearest answer because there's a huge variation. Yes? Okay, small question about moodiness, depression, and treating it medically. I'm kidding, it's not a small question, it's a big question. I'm gonna answer it in a very broad strokes kind of way. Moodiness is normal in pre-puberty and puberty. The brain is bathed in the hormones that are changing the body, and those hormones change the way we respond in terms of our moods and our affect. Okay, so estrogen pushes the brain to behave one way, testosterone pushes the brain to behave another way. They're like alcohol, okay? They just have brain effects. We know mood swings are normal because the brain is learning how to acclimate to these new hormones. The hormone levels are also shifting a lot. The swings are high, and so that changes the way that kids feel. I don't know. It is a chicken-egg situation as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if it's that your mood swings make you feel bad about yourself and create a negative self-esteem cycle that for some kids will result in anxiety and depression, one, the other, or both, or if it's a genetic predisposition to having depression, anxiety, or both, that then when you have the mood swings, brings it out. I think I can find examples of both. What I do know 100% for sure is that when kids do go through mood swings, they feel alone. They don't recognize that other kids have the same thing. So the biggest teaching point that I do, I go into schools and I teach, and I literally have them raise their hand if they've ever felt inappropriately moody, whether that's sad or happy, giggles, the whole thing. 100% of them raise their hand. I have them look around the room. I say, see, everyone feels it. Anyone here like how it feels? 100% of them put their hands down, and now they feel like that's universal. So understanding that everyone's in the same boat helps kids normalize it a little. But the long-term effects of prepubescent mood swings. I'm gonna guess that as we get more and more data on this, what we're gonna find is that the kids who end up coming out the other end with clinical depression, with anxiety disorder, with other psychiatric diagnoses, that puberty is unmasking them, okay? That those are kids who are predisposed or had some genetic reason for us to think that they were more likely to end up with these diagnoses. But is it the extended time period over which puberty is happening? Is that gonna help or hurt them? I don't know. I don't know. Medical intervention, I can tell you right now, if a child's gonna hurt themselves or someone else, they need medical intervention. There's no side effect of a medicine that is worse than a child hurting themselves or someone else. So to me, when you're balancing that, I do not bat an eye at the drugs. It is when it is grayer than that it becomes a longer conversation. It's when a child has anxiety and they are in a school setting that is fueling the anxiety and a home setting that is fueling the anxiety, and there are other things at play, and then what do you do and how do you treat it and all that, and every case is different. But for the kids who are really struggling with depression and psychiatric disease that's going to put them at risk, I don't care what the side effects of the medicine are, because that medicine is what their brain needs at the moment as a neurostabilizer. Does that answer? Right. 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 So the question is, if the hormonal fluctuations are affecting the brain so profoundly, when do they calm down? And then if you introduce a medicine, does it help? Does it stabilize? Does it hurt? And I don't have an answer to when do the fluctuations slow down, because the time frame over which these fluctuations is occurring is lengthening every year. And so I don't know. We do know that once a girl gets her period, and again, I'm going to the girls because they're easier to study. Once a girl gets her period regularly, the hormonal fluctuations hit a rhythm. But most girls, 60% of girls, when they get their first period, are completely irregular, whether it's for 6 months or 2 years, it's unpredictable, but they're completely irregular, as are their hormonal fluctuations. And oftentimes parents will tell me, for those girls, that is when the mood swings are the worst, and a lot of these psychiatric questions come up is right around that time. So, but we don't know how long it lasts. I don't think people have looked that closely at it. And I don't know if medication makes things better long-term and stabilizes everything, or makes them worse long-term. And I think that is a study that needs to be done, because so many people take those medicines. But remember, we talk about a class of medicines that 1 in 10 Americans take. Within that class of medicines, there are dozens and dozens of different types, and so it's going to be very hard to figure it out. Anyone here who has experience with antidepressants knows that doctors change the type of antidepressant, the dose, the schedule constantly until they get the right configuration for any one particular person. So it gets complicated to study. Yes? The short answer is, I would be such a successful businesswoman if I knew the answer to that and I could bottle it and sell it. There are hints, there are clues. Girls typically have, if you look at pictures of Tanner breast staging, there's stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're usually at Tanner 3 to 4 when they get their period. So their breasts look like small but mature women's breasts, as opposed to just buds and that kind of awkward anatomy, that awkward anatomy. The better sign that I use and what I teach girls is that 100% of girls by 5th grade have discharge, clear mucousy discharge in their underpants every once in a while. When they start getting their discharge every single day for a few months, that is a sign, a soft sign, that their periods are coming. Girls are really bothered by the discharge, by the way. They hate it. And so if you're looking for an in to start talking to your daughter about any of this body stuff, I think that's an easy one because they hate it. So you already know how to approach it, which is like, oh, isn't this the worst? And you can also offer a solution. A lot of girls will use panty liners and they feel much, much better. Little side note, when you talk to your kids about puberty, don't like sit face to face and look them in the eye and oh, how you feeling about your puberty? Because it really doesn't work. So what you want to do is you want to be either in the car is the best, or at night when the lights are out. But you need a scenario where you're not making eye contact. So you take away the humiliation, and you want to bring up open-ended questions. Oftentimes, your kids will bring it up with you. Instead of you posing the question, like, has anyone in this room had their kid ask them a question? They're like, I don't know what to do with that question. I wasn't expecting it. And the easiest way to redirect it and figure out what they want to know is to say, that's such an interesting question. What makes you ask it, right? Because sometimes they're really not asking what you think they're asking. But when you see the things that you're seeing in your house, I think the easiest thing to do is find a time when you're not face to face and have a conversation acknowledging it and essentially holding up a mirror and helping your child see it. Because if you say to your daughter, how did you like how that felt yesterday when at the dinner table you just blew up? She's going to say to you, I hated it if I felt out of control. And then you guys can figure out a little solution, like, well, take a time out. Next, it's going to happen again. So next time, like, let's come up with a little wink or a something, and then you can just leave for a minute, because I don't want that to happen either. So let's just troubleshoot it and solve it. Yes? Yeah. Okay, so sleep is like thank you notes. When your mother tells you to do it, you don't do it, okay? So I really believe that kids need to be taught about sleep and parents need to teach their kids, but they're gonna hear it much louder and clearer from their non-parent, from their pediatrician, from a family friend. Coaches are huge in terms of health information for kids, especially teenage kids. So I always encourage you to whisper to, your child's favorite aunt or whoever it is, talk to them about sleep, because it falls on deaf ears coming from you. Sleep is so massively important for our kids, and they absolutely don't get enough. I am a believer that if we lived in an ideal world, all the way through high school, kids should get 10 hours of sleep a night. It is absolutely impossible, completely unrealistic, and so I don't say that to kids in that way because that creates angst for some kids, okay, because they feel like they're failing already. But that's what they should be getting. Sleep allows you to go into a restorative mode. It allows you to integrate knowledge from the day and store it in the correct parts of the brain so you can access it later and utilize that knowledge. It promotes growth. It is the only time you grow is when you're in deep sleep. That's when growth hormone gets released at a different rate and it actually tells your bones to grow. Okay? Sleep has so many functions, and once kids understand this, they're motivated to get themselves into bed earlier. But it's really, really, really hard. So in an ideal world, I would say 10 hours. If you look at adults in an ideal world, I would say 8 hours. Realistically speaking, adults don't get anywhere near 8, and kids don't get anywhere near 10. And so we just have to do what we can do about it. And there are a lot of articles that say the most important thing is routine. I find that a little idealistic. Yeah, it would be great to get in bed the same time every single night and have a perfect routine and get up at the same time, and our bodies would love us for that. But because I think that's unrealistic as well, what I tell people is, I'd rather your kid sleep in on a weekend day and catch up the sleep, because if the choice is a routine that gives them too little sleep every single night or a catch-up day, I'll take the catch-up day. And the other thing I tell kids is, put yourself in bed one night early, and that's usually a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday, because you can and you'll feel better the next day. But they won't take it from you. They will not take it from you, which is a shame. Last weekend, my son just joined a track club, and last weekend there was a track meet, and there's a boy who's a pretty great runner, and his parents are so committed to this track club that they were on spring break and they took a Friday night red-eye home so that, I don't know when the plane landed at 1 o'clock in the morning Friday night, so it wasn't technically a red-eye, so that he could be at the Saturday morning track meet. So he went to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he was up at 6:15 to run at the track meet. His parents were trying to get him to the event that he wanted to go to so badly. And he ran so poorly. Of course he ran so poorly. He had 4 hours of sleep. And he was sitting in the stands behind me, and he was crying. And I've taught him what I call growth ed. My kids are at John Thomas Dye, and I teach every year, and over 5 weeks. And I was his growth ed teacher, and I turned to him and I said, "You want to know how this could never happen again?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you tell me?" And he said, "I need to sleep before meets." And I said, "Yes, you do." And he said, "My mom always tells me, get your sleep, get your sleep." And I don't think I ever really believed her before. And I said, "Okay, so now," and he goes, "Now I'm going to tell my parents never to schedule a flight that late." And I'm going to go to bed. So sometimes they just need the bad experience in order to learn and be motivated themselves. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Sleep cycles are very important. If you wake up at the wrong part of your sleep cycle, it's really hard to get out of bed. It feels brutal. If you wake up at the correct part of your sleep cycle, you kind of jump up, bounce out. There are all those now fit bands and fuel bands that have sleep cycles associated with them that try to help you wake up at the right time in your cycle. I don't know how well or poorly they work, actually. But at a certain point, if you're routinized, if you go to bed at the same time every night and wake up at the same time every morning, you are far more likely to then get into the right REM rhythm where you will be waking up at the right point in your cycle. If you go to bed at 9 o'clock every night and you set your alarm for 6 o'clock in the morning and you find that at 5:55 you're popping out of bed and it's the right time for you, you don't even have to set your alarm anymore, you've beaten your clock, and you feel better. And likewise, when we wake our kids up, we know exactly when we're at the wrong part of their REM cycle and when we're at the right part of their REM cycle to wake them up. But until the technology gets a little bit better about tracking people's sleep cycles, I don't know that we're going to be able to control that very well. And I personally don't love having wireless devices attached to our kids' bodies and our bodies all day, every day. So I don't promote sleep bands and things like that, because just like chemicals, just like what's in our air, I don't know. I just don't know what the effects are. So I just say, you do what our parents did. You wake your kid up when they have to go to school, and you explain to them that if they wake up 5 minutes earlier on their own, get out of bed, you'll feel better. Yeah. 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 There are morning people and evening people. The question is, how much time do you need to be fully awake? There are morning people and evening people. People here in the audience who are morning people, I'm a morning person. You're like, you're up, you're going, you're doing, but don't ask me to do anything at night. People who are evening people will drag all morning long. They'll drag as long as you let them drag. So if you have a child who has to be in a pool at 6 o'clock in the morning and you're dragging them out of bed, but by 6 o'clock in the morning, she's swimming and she's happy and she's okay, that's fine. It's a struggle as a parent. I feel the struggle between giving my kids activities, exercise, fitness, and overscheduling them, letting them sleep, doing, I mean, we're all in the same struggle. It's impossible. I don't know what the solution is. I keep changing what I do as a parent quite radically from year to year because I feel like at every turn I'm messing it up. So I don't know, but I can just tell you a morning person will be happy to do stuff in the morning. And my daughter's not a morning person. I talk about sleep endlessly, and I have the 10-year-old who literally cannot fall asleep. Will be laying in a dark room, happy, not anxious, for 2 hours. Can't fall asleep. She's a night owl, and that's just her clock. So, yeah. Care and keeping a view for boys. Let me just start with, I have literally begged American Girl, begged on my hands and knees to let me write that book. There is no book that covers lifestyle and basic hygiene and what's happening to your body and nothing more for boys. Nothing. There are a lot of books for boys that have that in the first 15 or 20 pages in a very truncated version, some a lot of text, others a little more cartoony, but the back 80 pages, it's TMI for a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. My son's 8 at this point. That's what we've got, and so that's what we're using, and I am a believer in using clips on pages and just saying, you can look at it, I don't care, but you're not going to be interested. It's so much further down the road, so I'm going to clip it for you just for convenience, but feel free to look. There are a couple of good books like that. There's one, God, I can picture it, but I don't remember the name. There's one that has a blue cover and cartoony, bubbly writing, and it's like the body book. It's not the body book for boys. Well, that's the other one. It's happening to me. So what's that? It's Perfectly Normal is in the series with It's So Amazing, and It's Perfectly Normal. That's a comic. It's phenomenal. It's Perfectly Normal and It's So Amazing are excellent, but they have a lot of information in them. It's So Amazing is about sex. It's a great, great, great book. But no, it's, is that the one with the blue cover and the white bubble writing? Yes. Yeah. And what's it called? What's Happening to Me. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just the first probably third of that book that's appropriate for younger boys. But there's those poor boys, I'm telling you, they get left, Yeah. No, they do not. Trust me, I know. They don't. They have no insight, and no one tells them. Like my quest, when I teach growth ed, my quest is for you to understand why you need to use soap in the shower, right? This is so basic. Why Axe does not hide every smell. Anyone who doesn't have boys who use Axe products, just you wait. They don't know. No one teaches them. And I think we all think our kids are going to learn by osmosis, and they don't. So these books there is no equivalent. No hygiene book. None. I know. I'm trying to write it. I'm working on it. I know. Blogging, how about blogging? I struggle with blogging. There are 4 million mom bloggers in the US. It's really hard to find content within the blogosphere. So I just try to curate content and sort of direct people to interesting articles and interesting blogs, but I feel like it's a disservice to the world to put yet another blog out there. It's a lot of mom bloggers, so. All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation to come, and I hope you have a great day.